Hi guys, it's Claire Rose here again, and today I'm going to be bringing you a list of 10 queer books which you may not have heard about before. I'm making this video for two reasons. Number one, it is currently Pride Month, and so that seemed like the perfect time to make this video and to make people aware of a few queer reads which they may not have encountered before now. Number two, I read almost exclusively queer books. If you go through my Goodreads history, particularly recently, you'll find it harder to find any straight books than you would if you were searching exclusively for queer books, if that makes sense to you. So I think that this is something that I can talk to you guys about. Now, just before I get started, I want to say this is not an exclusive list. I'm not saying that the books on this list are so rare you will never have heard of them, but they're not as frequently talked about as some of the ultra popular LGBTQIA books here on BookTube and in the wider bookish community. To kick things off, I'm going to talk to you about a couple of graphic novels. The first of which is Are You Listening by Tillie Walden. I would describe this as a surreal road trip through America featuring two queer protagonists. I'm not sure if they ever actually express how they identify, whether they identify as lesbian or bisexual, or whether they just are some flavour of queerness, but that is what they are. And the story itself does not centre around them being gay or their sexuality. That is just an addition to the plot, which deals much more strongly with family ties, friendship, trauma, and surviving from that trauma, as well as, like I said, with this very surreal backdrop, very eerie, creepy. The art style gets more and more unrealistic as the story progresses. We start off with quite typical realistic landscapes, and by the end it's quite apocalyptic and disastrous unfolding around the two girls in their car as they travel through the landscape. And you know, I really enjoy the fact that the sexuality is not the main focus of this book. I mean, every book about a straight person is not about the fact that they are straight, so why should every book about a queer person be about the fact that they are queer? That is just an addition, and that is what I enjoyed here. I would say, be warned going into this book, it deals with the subject of sexual assault and dealing with the aftermath and the trauma that comes as a consequence of that experience, so be warned going into this. Next up we have Super Fun Sexy Times by Meredith McLaren. Let's all take a moment to laugh at this title and this cover, which really tells you everything you need to know about this graphic novel. It's a series of very short stories told in graphic novel format, all of which feature around superhero plots, and all of which are very, very erotic. When I say they feature around superhero plots, it's more the fact that these people just so happen to be superheroes or have superpowers, or indeed supervillains with supervillainous powers, but it is more about their relationships and just very small snippets into their relationships, some of which are established relationships, some of them are just quick flings, a couple of them are married. It's very quick-paced, just genuine fun, like the title says. There's nothing too serious in here, but that being said, it has fantastic representation across the board. There are so many sexualities represented in here. There's gay rep, lesbian rep, I think there's bisexual rep, there is trans rep, I believe, fat rep. Great representation across diverse races and the way that people look, and none of that matters because it's just erotica for you to enjoy in a visual format. Obviously this is incredibly adult. I'm going to try and see if I can find a page that isn't too adult so I can show you the art style because I love it. Oh gosh, everything's very, very adult. Okay, here we go. If we don't look too closely at the writing, here you can see it's very bright, very colourful, true comic book style. One of the things that I loved about this book is how healthy all of the relationships are in here. All of the dynamics within here are so incredibly healthy. It involves a lot of discussion about kink and about finding your limits and respecting those limits for your partner, deciding what works for you and what doesn't work, and just how you can make those relationships work. I really enjoyed this and I would highly, highly recommend it. But maybe don't read it in public. I mean, maybe do read it in public. If you want to be sat reading this book in public, you go for it, and I respect you for that. Next up is a graphic novel which I don't have here to show you. It's really weird because I have vivid memories of reading this graphic novel, and I know I had it physically at the time, or at least I'm pretty sure I did, but I cannot find it anywhere on my bookshelf, and I know I didn't lend it out to anyone, so it really has just vanished off the face of the earth, and I don't know where it is. But that book is When I Arrived at the Castle by Emily Carroll. I'll put a picture of it up here so that you guys can see what it looks like. You may know Emily Carroll from her book Through the Woods, or Into the Woods, I always forget what it's called. Through the Woods, which is a collection of short horror stories told in graphic novel format. This is again on the horror theme, and as with Are You Listening, the fact that the characters are queer or possibly gay is a very small side point to the bigger story. In fact, I don't think it's really discussed much at all. It's just sort of implied and there on the page for you to see yourself. And what you take away from that is up to you. So I would say it's horror with a queer twist. I'd say I'm not the biggest buff on horror. I don't read any horror books at all, really. I've never read a Stephen King. I don't watch horror movies. So maybe I'm not the best judge of what is horrific and what is not, but I know that Emily Carroll's writing and her images are genuinely creepy. They creep me out, and they creep a lot of other people out too, but it's really atmospheric, this graphic novel, and is told mostly in the colour palette of white, black, grey and a bit of red, and that red is very dramatic and really makes a focal point of the page when it is featured. As with a lot of other Emily Carroll stories, there is a bit of a fairy tale essence to it, but not explicitly any particular fairy tale that you or I may have heard of before. Moving on to the books and the novels, I'm going to start with a novel which I do not have to show you, and that is Ascension by Jacqueline Koyanagi. Again, cover will go up here so you can see it. As you may be able to tell from this cover, this is a sci-fi story with great diversity yet again. There is a main character who is black, there is a main character who is disabled, there is representation for invisible illnesses and chronic illnesses, there is bisexual representation, polyamorous representation, queer representation. We follow one woman who has ambitions of taking to the stars and seeing the universe, and so she takes the opportunity when a spacecraft lands near her home to stow away and to escape and see the universe. What she doesn't realise is that the spaceship she has ended up on is full of kind of a ragtag band of people and entities, beings. It's kind of that typical sci-fi mould of like found family, people from all different walks of life and races and species, in fact, because it's sci-fi, all coming together and having fun in space. There is a deeper plot to this, and there are some very heavy topics that this book deals with, but it does so in a fun format. Highly recommend this book if you're looking for sci-fi with a queer twist. Now on to something completely different, with Things a Bright Girl Can Do by Sally Nichols. This book is set during the time of the suffragettes, and it follows two girls, one who is from a higher class society and has her life planned out for her, but she is seeking freedom and adventure and believes there is more to life than what she has set out for her. And then there's another girl who is very much involved in the suffragette movement, and she is obviously wanting equality and all of those things that the other girl is wanting, albeit in a different format. These two girls meet, and there is inevitably a culture clash as their ideals come into play, and they may be not wanting the same things as each other, or if they are, the ways that they are going about it are very different. They both find themselves highly embroiled in the suffragette movement, and this book does not shy away from the grim realities of what that meant for women. There is, I believe in here, a scene of force feeding and going on hunger strike in a prison, which is quite grim reading, especially for a young adult book. But through this all, there is the hope of romance for these two young women as they start to fall for each other. I'm not going to tell you how this book ends. I will say that it is a bittersweet ending, and it kind of broke my heart a little bit the first time I read it, but I would recommend it to everybody else because not only does it have queer representation, it tackles a very important era of our history and of women's history in a fictional format. These books are really a little bit all over the place. I've not set them into any particular order or any particular themes. So we are going to go on to The Wicked Comet by Laura Carlin. I would recommend this book for any fans of Sarah Waters. It has that same air to it. It is set in olden times, I think Victorian London. It shows that kind of dark underbelly of London in the same vein as Fingersmith does. And people have started to go missing from the slums of London. They're not really investigated, these disappearances, because they're not anybody too high class. They're not people that high society would worry about, and so they're not deemed particularly important. The main character is a girl called Hester, who has been brought up in these slums of London, and then she finds her world colliding with that of a very rich, noble lady called Rebecca Brock, who has an air of mystery about her. There's something different about Rebecca that people don't really want to talk about. There is a past to her that is drawing people away from her, but also having this aura around her, which Hester is very, very drawn to. And over the course of their relationship, they grow closer as first friends and then as potentially something more, as they try to get to the bottom of these disappearances that are going on in London, find out who is responsible and where these people have been going. Then moving on to a book which I only recently finished, and that is Orpheus Go by Bryn Rebel Henry. I really loved this book. I was expecting to love it and I was not disappointed. This is again a young adult novel, but I would say at the higher end of young adult. It deals with very adult themes, as this is the story of two girls who are sent to a gay conversion camp in America. They're discovered to be in a relationship together and are sent away by their families to this camp. It then deals with the fallout of the girls at that camp and the severe abuse that they are suffering at the hands of the camp owners, who are supposed to be curing them of their sexuality. And as you would expect with that theme, it gets very dark in places, really harrowing to read. There is an element of myth and folklore woven in throughout this story, as the main girl, Rhea, is kind of a little bit obsessed with mythology, and she sees herself in the role of Orpheus. She sees it as her mission to travel into the land of the underworld, rescue her true love, and bring her back to the land of the living. There is a little bit of explanation at the back of the book which talks about some of the mythology representations throughout the book, which I found really interesting as an addition, and I think this would be a really great starting place for anybody who has an interest in queer literature and mythology, to kind of marry the two together and look at how those can be represented in one book. I could not compile this list without including at least one Kirsty Logan book. You might know her as the author of The Grace Keepers and then The Gloaming. She has a couple of short story collections as well, and the one that I'm going to talk to you about today is Things We Say in the Dark. This is one of her lesser known books. It's more recently come out, and I've not heard it hyped up anywhere near as much as certainly The Grace Keepers was when that first came out. Any Kirsty Logan book is fantastic for queer representation. Most of her books, I think, have some element of lesbian rep or queer rep, and this book is no exception. It is a collection of short horror stories where the fact that the characters are queer, lesbian, gay, whatever, is very much secondary to the horror elements of the book, which again, as I said before, is something that I enjoy a lot. In addition to the horror within these stories, a lot of them have folklore elements, particularly Scottish folklore elements. I believe there's one in here about a Kelpie, and it's been a while since I've read them now, so I can't remember the specifics of any of the stories. Oh no, I've just remembered one of them, and it's very vivid in my mind, and it's amazing, and I can't say what it's about because that will spoil the book for you. The stories within this book are divided into three categories. There is the house, the child, and the other. Each of those is something that is encountered quite a lot as a staple of horror fiction, and Kirsty Logan adds her own twist to that, exploring it throughout her stories and what those horror staples can mean for each of the different characters and what they can represent for the reader as well. Only 2 more books left to go, and I'm not sure which one to go with. Okay, now we're nearly at the end, but I had to include this book on my list, and that is The Queen of Air Flavia by Effie Calvin. This is only a very short book, and it's self-published, so it hasn't got much media attention, but it is beloved by those who have read it here on BookTube. This is a fantasy book in the first of a fantasy series of what I sort of standalone novels, but within the same universe. And in this universe, there is pretty much no such thing as homophobia or transphobia or biphobia. Everybody is accepted for what they are, and you very much just fall in love with who you fall in love with. This story follows the lives of two princesses who are in an arranged marriage. The main princess, who we start off the story with, she was destined to marry the prince of a foreign kingdom, and they had been in this arrangement for a long time, and then the prince died shortly before their wedding, and so as an alternative she is now going to be married to the prince's sister, which just seems like the ideal arrangement for everybody who's concerned. This is such a refreshing read in that there is none of the pressures around sexuality. It's a great piece of escapism, and while it is important that we tackle subjects of homophobia and abuse subsequently in literature, it's very important that we do tackle those. Sometimes we do just need a bit of escapism, and that is what this book is for. You can go away to a fantasy world where none of that matters, and you can fall in love with the princess, and nothing will come of that. It's much more about the fantasy world and dragons returning to the earth and intrigue, court intrigue, magic. Loved it. Can't wait to carry on with the series, which I am yet to do. And finally, the last book on this list I have saved until last because it is one of my favourites and holds a very, very special place in my heart, and that is Peter Darling by Austin Chant. Now, this book, my darling, my precious, my everything. I feel kind of weird recommending this book at the moment because it's currently out of print. If you can get a hold of a copy of this book, please, please do. It is going to be reprinted at some point in the future. I've seen it on the author's Twitter that is in the works, but I don't know when that is going to happen, particularly with coronavirus. But oh my gosh, this book is everything to me. Those of you who know me when I read this book will be sick to death of me raving about it and telling people how fantastic it is. It is essentially the story of Peter Pan with a bit of a twist. 10 years ago, Peter Pan left Neverland to return to his ordinary everyday life, and in his ordinary everyday life, he was previously known as Wendy Darling. Now he has escaped again back to Neverland, and he finds that it is a changed world. He is no longer sure who the villains are and who the heroes are. The Lost Boys are very different. Hook is very different. The war games that are being played between Hook and the Lost Boys have changed, and Peter finds himself being drawn more and more towards Hook as a person, and then their relationship starts to develop from there. As you might be able to tell from that summary, this book deals with a trans main character, and it is an Own Voices trans book, and therefore I would highly recommend it for that alone. But the fantasy elements are fantastic, the Peter Pan retelling is on point, and the sexual tension between Peter and Hook is just perfection. I was swooning over this book and squealing at different parts in it, and I just, oh, it's everything to me. Cannot recommend it enough. Can't recommend it enough for the trans rep because that's amazing and not something that you come across very often in books. Starting to more now, thank goodness. I believe that is a common theme throughout Austin Chant's work, which is great. I can't read more when they come back into print, but I would also just recommend it as a fun fantasy book and as a gay love story, because that is what it is at its heart. It's all about identity and being who you truly are and not having to conform to the expectations of society around you. Fantastic. Love it. Just, oh yes, perfect. So that is it for my list of queer books which you may not have heard about before. Let me know down below if there's any that you think I missed that I should have included on this list. Had you heard of any of these books before? And if not, are you now intrigued to check them out? I would love to know your thoughts on that. If you liked this video, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and to just chat to me in the comments down below. Talk to me about queer books, because that is what I am here for. I am on BookTube because I love books and because I love queer books in particular. Enjoy Pride Month. Have a happy and safe Pride Month if at all possible. And I will see you again soon. Bye!